Hi, this is Dave, and before we get to the show, I wanted to ask you a favor. One of our goals this year is to grow the show so that What Does Star Wars Mean to You reaches more listeners. And that's where we're asking you for help. And it's really easy. Wherever you listen to us, please hit that subscribe button. If you're liking the show, give us a 5-star rating and review on the platform you listen to us. We make a lot of fun of the algorithm and the smash that button thing, but it really does help us get noticed by new fans. And if you want to join in on the conversation, find us on social at Star Wars Mean to You. That's Star Wars Mean, the number 2 in the letter U. Now, let's chat some Star Wars.
Hello there, this is Elora.
And this is Dave, and you're listening to What Does Star Wars Mean to You? This is a show where we talk to all kinds of fans of the franchise, from industry insiders to indie artists, from obsessive mythologists to mega collectors. Plus, it's just fun to chat Star Wars. And the idea of it is, I'm an OT kid, and Elora?
I'm a prequel kid.
Is a prequel kid. And we're here to take the hate out of the debate, one fan at a time.
Yeah.
So if you're liking the show, please rate and subscribe us. You didn't subscribe us. Wow. If you're liking the show, please rate and
subscribe to us.
If you're liking the show, please subscribe to us and rate us. Oh my God.
Please don't rate us based off of this
intro. If you're liking the show, please give us a 5-star rating and please subscribe to the show because, as all podcasters say, it really helps to get the word out there. And if you want to join us on social, join us at Star Wars Mean to You. That's at Star Wars Mean, the number 2 in the letter U. I made it through.
You did it. Yay. So
I'm just going to say this. I just want to say real quick, I probably cut out a lot, but still left stumbling in. So What you guys just heard was like 30% of that intro.
Yep. Yeah, we're working on it because this is the episode between episodes. This is our mini-sode, and we're still figuring out the format for this. It's an episode between episodes that gives us a chance to talk about the previous interview, things that were shared with us, and we get to kind of like cherry pick things that we want to take a closer look at.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we spoke with Charles Stuart Ross last week. He's the creator of One Man Star Wars, which is a really fun show. I've not personally seen it, but I've seen lots of clips online, and he was a delight to talk to. We really enjoyed diving into his creative process, is what we're trying to say here, and how Star Wars has influenced his life and his art. And one thing that came out of that conversation that I thought was really interesting as a former theater kid myself was his kind of our discussion in there on masks and mask work and the physicality of performance. So for a quick refresher, we're going to splice that in here. Feel free to use.
Is that an official sound effect?
That was my official, like, sound effect for a lightsaber. Because I was a theater kid. And so I'm kind of going back in time with the way you're kind of describing your process. And it's taking me back to all of the like mask work we used to do to kind of tap into physicality and stuff. That, would you say that was like your primary interest or influence into kind of what you went to, building this kind of one-man show empire?
Geez, I don't know. We had a really fantastic, I would say, he was our movement teacher, but movement was mime and, stage fighting and stage combat. And like we did neutral mask, we did character mask, just being able to sort of be within your body. And for me, I was always a very physical actor, even from a young age. That was just where I trended towards. Like for me on stage, when I do the show, it's a cross between choreography, sense memory, which I guess is really the whole point of doing movement stuff, doing any kind of mime at all.
Yeah.
It's not strict choreography. Like I don't go, well, this is like, and a 1, 2, 3, and a step back and sashay. Like I just remember it through almost like a song in a way. And, for those that actually do have a physical, very physical way of acting, that it's, or even, maybe even the people that do diving, you feel more of what you're doing physically. And there's a visualization where you can picture yourself what you're doing, but you're in a zone where you kind of forget yourself. You're just sort of being. And I forget what I'm doing, like all the time. I don't mean forget what I'm doing and stop. I just forget that I'm in the show. And
kind of that buoyancy, like in and scuba diving, you find the buoyancy of the character. I don't know if that's a thing, but
that is definitely. I love that buoyancy for sure.
So inspired by Charles's take on the physicality that's needed for him to bring these characters to stage, we thought it would be fun to talk about the masked characters in Star Wars. Charles spoke a lot about how he has this choreography for characters that isn't really choreography, but becomes kind of more like the buoyancy of his performance. He just kind of physically finds them. And he does this with such an ease and sophistication. The audience watching doesn't necessarily know how difficult this type of work is to do, because if it's done really well, it looks easy.
Yeah, it just comes across as a character.
Yeah. So we thought there was a really good correlation here to take a look at some of the most like iconic masked Star Wars characters and the actors behind that. But I think before we do that, for those of you listening who are like, oh my God, masks in theater, what does this all mean?
What Taylor Swift nonsense did I just land in?
Welcome to my TED Talk. Let me give a brief history. There's a lot of like cultural and historical context for mask work. I think that anyone that has ever stepped foot in a theater or knows anything about theater knows the very famous masks of the comedy and the tragedy. It's kind of a symbol for all theater, and that comes from the ancient Greek theater. There's a lot of historical traditions of mask work in the Japanese Nao and Kabuki theater, and then the European dell'arte, which I've probably butchered saying.
But you probably said it so much better than I would have. If it were me, it would be 5 minutes of dell'arte?
Commedia dell'arte, and the indigenous ritual performance that's common in a lot of cultures around the world. So always been kind of a way to put emphasis on physicality in characters, often used to explore archetypal characters and kind of universal themes with symbolic imagery. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of it in a nutshell. I think in terms of where we were going in our conversation with Charles, masks are used in a lot of training and technique for actors, just to really help them understand how physicality and movement and also your vocal expression can bring so much more to a character than just acting with your face.
It's just, and Star Wars is rife with masks.
Yes.
And to be able to bring a character to life when you can't show your face has got to be a heck of a challenge.
Oh, yeah. I mean, to use your entire body to communicate emotion and intention.
Yeah.
It's the best in the biz are the only ones that can do it effectively. Yeah.
I think my absolute favorite in Star Wars. Can we talk about Star Wars now?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Before people turn this off.
No. I think the history was great. I loved it. But my favorite Star Wars character in a mask. Well, god damn. This is I just
No, go for it.
Darth Vader.
Mm-hmm.
So impressive to get the range of emotions, mostly anger. In fact, there's that really funny meme, and I think it's also a coffee cup, and it's like various pictures of Darth Vader. Well, it's the same picture of Darth Vader, and it says angry, happy, sad, and that's so true. Yeah. But in a scene like Return of the Jedi, when Luke is being electrocuted with Force lightning by the Emperor, you can almost feel the anguish as Darth Vader looks to Luke and to the Emperor and back to Luke, and it's phenomenal.
That was the late David Prowse doing the physicality work, and then of course I think everyone knows that Darth Vader was originally voiced by James Earl Jones. But it's interesting because you're talking about the original trilogy. You have two different actors behind that mask, bringing that character to life, and two very different types of skill set. Voice acting compared to the more like the physical presence of David Prowse. You have two actors behind the scenes that are the masters of their craft that brought to the screen the most famous villain of all time, who is known for his, exactly what you said, just the depth of the character. And that's really, really hard to accomplish when you cannot see that character's expression. So there's Darth Vader.
There's Darth Vader.
I was going to say, kind of in a similar vein, within the Darth Vader family tree, one of my favorites is actually Kylo Ren.
Oh, yeah.
I think that
So much in the family tree.
so much in the family tree. I think that his character is really interesting because you're talking about a character that's chosen to be masked.
Yeah.
You see
Yeah.
Kylo on screen, both masked and not, throughout his character's journey. I think that another thing that we talked about kind of as we were like getting ready for our record too is how interesting, how frequently it is in Star Wars that the antagonists of stories are portrayed masked versus unmasked. And I think there's a lot of symbolism there. I think that masks can serve as like a representation for a character's really deep inner turmoil and conflict. And then in the case of Kylo, it's kind of this transformation. Like when he's feeling more like Ben, you don't see him masked as much.
That's so true.
There's also this like, from a storytelling perspective, I think there's a really like visual distinction, and there was a really intentional choice made there to put their villains, as it were, into masks, and I think it makes them more memorable to an audience, more distinguishable. But going back to Kylo, his character arc is so interesting because I think his portrayal of Kylo deserved the critical acclaim that it got. I think he had the same level of like intentionality. Is that a word?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I
Intentionality and like just like the depth of emotion that you got from early Darth Vader performance. But what's interesting is you get him in these moods where he kind of is taking it on and off. I think it's where it really represents his own internal struggle between who he is and who he's kind of chosen to become. And it's Last Jedi where he, in a fit of rage, because he's been called a child in a mask, destroys it. I was circling back to that because I think that there's a storytelling tool in masks as well. And that's a really good example of it.
I think Kylo Ren is a perfect example of it. I'd never really thought about the mask as a signpost to his inner feelings of like, I feel like the bad guy now, so I'm going to wear the mask. I feel like not so much the bad guy right now, so I'm going to take it off. And it's also really interesting that the vocal performance in the mask, it's kind of, his vocals are staticky and, digitally processed to give it like kind of a crackle that Darth Vader does not have. He just has the breathing, but it makes it harder to understand Kylo Ren in those moments. I think it goes back to how Kylo Ren is a distortion of Ben.
Totally. Yeah. And that he's that point you touched on of it almost being hard to understand him. It forces you as the audience to sit in that kind of like uncomfortable feeling of like, well, wait, but like, what does he want? Like, what is the point of all of this? And like, it's a really good representation of the fact that like Kylo probably doesn't even totally understand it himself. We understand his motivation. We've seen the backstory. We know that there was a great betrayal. We know that he's angry.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of internal debate within him. And that's a really good like storytelling tool to kind of demonstrate that.
Absolutely.
He gets to a very similar place that Anakin does where he, I think, feels like, well, I've gone this far. I might as well see the course,
Yeah.
But like, he's also not totally convinced himself either that that's the route. He's a fascinating character.
And going back to Anakin, I've often wondered what it would be like, because I always forget that he takes the mantle of Darth Vader before the mask.
Mm-hmm.
And I often wonder what it would be like to have instead of a lava planet, they went to a water planet, and he didn't like get burned in lava in his final fight, and still had the face of Anakin Skywalker, and what that would be like in A New Hope when those doors are blast open on the Tantive 4 and Darth Vader strides out, and it's like, hi, I'm Anakin.
Yeah, it wouldn't have had the same visual distinction or the symbolism.
Yeah. And then there's what do you think of someone like Jar Jar Binks, where it's Ahmed Best, and I'm talking more, I'm using Jar Jar Binks as the example, but CGI'd characters where it's an actor on set portraying the character. They may have elements of a mask on set, but eventually that's the actor will, I think erased is it's too much of the actor will be replaced by new physicality or
Well, they're kind of they're kind of almost drawn over. Like,
yes.
yeah, like you have, so Jar Jar, I think, is interesting, because I'm going to back up just slightly and say not all of the antagonists in Star Wars are masked. I mean, there's a lot of evidence of that. We just covered 2. There's also Captain Phasma and, Boba Fett, although jury's out as to is he an anti-hero, all of that.
But as far as the original trilogy
goes, with Chewbacca is a character you could say is a masked character.
Yes.
And I think it's interesting because if you look at like Jar Jar Binks versus Chewbacca, I wonder how much Jar Jar's, like, the fury from the fandom, the reaction and the hatred for Jar Jar, how much of that would have not been true if they hadn't CGI covered Ahmed Best's performance? Like, I'm curious because Chewbacca, everyone loves Chewbacca. I love Chewbacca. Chewbacca is a funny, relatable character, badass, all of those things, and yet he only speaks his alien language, and his alien language is kind of it's there a little bit for comic relief. Like it's kind of funny, but you see, you have Jar Jar, who is a little bit grandiose and loud. A
little more slapsticky.
A little bit more slapsticky, and there might be a place for criticism there, but I'm curious how much of that, because of Ahmed Best's performance being essentially CGI'd over, so you had a more cartoon look and feel. It completely erased. I don't want to say completely erased the human element, because I have a lot of respect for the actor and what he brought to it. But you can see the difference between Chewbacca and Jar Jar, but they're both, like, I really feel like the intention was for Jar Jar to be a Chewbacca-like sidekick character.
Yeah.
I think that the same thing happened with Yoda in the prequel trilogy. You have Yoda in the original trilogy. He's puppeteered by, many talented puppeteers and actors and stuff. And then you have Frank Oz, right? Yeah.
Yeah, Frank Oz.
Yeah, but then you have the prequel trilogy where he's 100% CGI, and it's true, it robs something of it. He's not as charming. In fact, Ewan McGregor is quoted saying as such that Yoda was not nearly as endearing to him as CGI than he was as a puppet. So I think that there's 2 examples of having the human behind the character, and then one being essentially covered up, and then one being erased completely, and you still kind of end up with the same lukewarm reception of those characters. Like, that human element is important. It brings something.
It also seems to affect the chemistry, just because, like you were saying, Ewan McGregor, I said his name right?
Yeah.
Ewan McGregor. All of a sudden, his name sound completely wrong to me. Yeah. He had that reaction to CGI Yoda while working with him.
Yeah.
And then you have The Mandalorian, where with Baby Yoda, where Werner Herzog very famously said, "Don't make this a digital character. He is like so." I don't know what he said. I'm going to paraphrase or make up my own quote, but he's just so damn lovable as he is. And
oh my God, good point. I didn't have Baby Yoda, or it's not Baby Yoda. I didn't have Grogu in my notes. But that's such a good point, that I think they really learned their lesson from CGI Yoda, that they knew that they couldn't repeat that. If they wanted Grogu to be beloved like he is now, there had to be. But, that's interesting, because isn't he an animatronic?
Oh, yeah. I think he's a puppet / animatronic.
Yeah. But there's still so much human involvement in that. And it's just interesting how even that light touch makes such a difference. It's so true in the droids, too.
It's absolutely so true in the droids. And speaking of the droids, one that we kind of blew over, who is incredible, is C-3PO. Like,
C-3PO.
How did we not? I mean,
well, we just hadn't gotten there yet.
We just haven't. Okay. But C-3PO.
Anthony Daniels.
And thank you. Just blanking on his name. Anthony Daniels, when it comes to physicality, my God, he has it nailed down. Because I think with Vader and Chewbacca, it's like, you just have to be big and somewhat agile. But what Anthony Daniels brings to C-3PO is this stiff, prissy walk and these kind of jerky movements of surprise and shock that so perfectly fit his kind of like whiny voice.
He encapsulated that character on the page better than I think anyone could have.
Yes.
Everything you just said. It's one of the reasons he's one of my favorite characters in Star Wars is actually his physicality. I am a huge sucker for a really good like physical comedic actor. Anthony Daniels is up there. I'm also like a devout fan of David Hyde Pierce for the same reason. In fact, he's the only celebrity I've ever wanted to meet.
So basically, you want to meet the human form of C-3PO.
Pretty much.
Yeah. I think you have a type.
Can you tell I was a theater child? Yeah, everything he brings to C-3PO, it wouldn't have been the same if C-3PO had been in a time of CGI character development. And I think that if Star Wars hadn't been founded in the 70s, I wonder how much of this would have been CGI because that became so popular. Everyone was jumping on it. Everyone wanted to be the best at it. Everyone was including it in their films. I mean, look at what it is today. I mean, my God, some of the CGI we see is, it's hard to distinguish between what's real and not even sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think one of the reasons Star Wars captured so many hearts when you're talking about all these different alien beings and these droid bots and everything is because there was still a human element to it. You know, Kenny Baker's famous portrayal of R2-D2 is another example of that. Like you compare R2 with BB-8 and it is different. It's very different.
Oh my God, yes. Yeah. R2, yeah, because BB-8, like R2-D2 seems to have this kind of personality that is sassy, very sassy, spunky, kind of adventurous. Bold. He kind of has this range of emotions that simmer. And I think BB-8 is just kind of emotive.
Yeah.
Like where he's just kind of putting an exclamation point on the emotion of the moment of the scene.
Yeah, it's the Wall-E effect.
Yes,
like, you know, like it's really easy to take CGI or animated characters and make people fall in love with them, but it's not human, and you know it's not human, and you can sense that. It doesn't make them any less beloved, I don't think, but
no.
Like if you're comparing BB-8 to R2-D2, I think R2 still has a larger fan base, and part of that is because R2 was first.
Yes.
But I think the other part of that is that R2's famously human operated.
Yes.
I do. I think that I think that's a big part of it. Yeah.
The other droid that is really I think is comparable to Ahmed Beth's Jar Jar Binks, or not Ahmed Beth's Jar Jar Binks, the movie's Jar Jar Binks, the CGI Jar Jar Binks, is K2SO from Rogue One. And Alan Tudyk's performance, because Alan Tudyk is there on set and stilts and kind of a pseudo, got the camera right on his face with all the dots on his face, and he's saying the lines and everything. But I think
K2SO is my husband's favorite droid. Yeah,
yeah, because he's so great. He's kind of like C-3PO toned down just a touch. And with a little more, he's actually like if you took R2-D2 and C-3PO and merged them together.
Totally. Oh my God, I never thought of it like that. That's exactly
and that's K2SO.
Yeah. He is a blunt object.
He is a blunt object. And I think because he is computer animated, but not so much that he feels like animation. And I think when you said Jar Jar Binks felt like animation, that nails it. He feels like animation as opposed to just purely brought to life.
Yeah, I think we perceive the animation, the CGI, as being slightly less grounded or relatable compared to something that's puppeteered or a human behind either the mask or the suit, I guess would also be an applicable term here. That invokes more of a sense of like realism and authenticity. But I'm curious what the audience thinks.
Are
we just Did we do all this research on the history of masks and acting and we've convinced ourselves of this? I don't think so, but
No, I think we actually, I think there was a couple times where, and I know I don't say this a lot, where I was like, I'm impressed by us. That's interesting.
Yeah. I think there's something here, and I think that I'd love to see more folks behind some of the characters as Star Wars develops. I think that
yes,
BB-8 was not a loss. Like BB-8 was definitely a win.
absolutely.
But we all love BB-8, and I'm just using him as an example. As we develop more of this, as if we have any creative influence on Star Wars, as Star Wars. The
Dear
franchise.
Disney.
Dear Disney, as you progress into the Star Wars universe and continue to develop these stories, I think that it would be a huge miss to not bring in more physical actors into these characters, because I think it's what lended to the original love and charm of our favorite aliens and our favorite droids. And it's becoming more and more of, I think, a lost art. So we should celebrate the people out there that are doing it well.
And you're right to ask, what does our audience think? Because they should let us know at Star Wars Mean to You.
Yeah.
That's at Star Wars Mean, the number 2 and the letter U. You can find us on Twitter or X, Instagram, Facebook. What was that new one?
All the
Threads?
socials. Yeah, I think
All the
we're on it
socials.
all. Yeah. We're just begging y'all to love us. No, I'm kidding.
Actually, that is the English translation for the word podcast. That people don't know that podcast is Latin for please love me.
Please love me. We are intrinsically insecure people, and no, I'm joking.
We are not confident like masked work people.
No,
People who take the stage and can deliver an emotional quality performance with something blocking their face.
This is why I am now doing podcast work with you and not still in the theater. I grew out of that boldness. But I also shout out to Charles Stuart Ross for inspiring this episode, because this was a really fun walk down memory lane for me theater-wise, and it was, I think, a really fun conversation, just kind of diving into our favorite masked characters in Star Wars and what the people behind them have brought to the franchise. And I have a lot of love and respect, and I think that a lot of the fandom does too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting because masks are such a huge part of Star Wars. And yet, at the end of the day, Star Wars is a human story.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God. Perfect button. Wrap it up.
If you want to end on a perfect button, always just say, blah, 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 a human story. And then boom.
Mic drop.
Mic drop. Every time. And now it's time for Matthew Freeman's Octu Baby. Matthew is a friend of the show and the author of the extremely enjoyable newsletter Octu Baby. You can find the link in the podcast notes or go to matthewfreeman.substack.com.
Hello, this is Matt Freeman, and this is The Phantom Menace, originally published on January 29th, 2024 on my newsletter Octu Baby. Thanks for listening. When Star Wars Episode I, The Phantom Menace, pod raced into cinemas in May of 1999, it was met with well-documented head-scratching, lamentation, hand-wringing, and yes, celebration. It was a cultural split screen. Some spent years trying to forgive or forget the movie. Others have spent years trying to explain their love for it. We're approaching the 25th anniversary of Episode I's release. See also My Midlife Crisis. Episode I has been maligned and defended for a quarter century. I've spent quite a lot of that time telling family and friends why I like the movie, so, I don't feel an urgent need to do so today. Less well-trod ground, though, is where The Phantom Menace comes from. The Phantom Menace did not simply spring fully formed from the 16-year void between Episodes 6 and 1. In fact, George Lucas's work in the intervening years provided more than a few hints as to what was to come. It's been well chronicled that Lucas was persuaded by the digital animation advances in Jurassic Park and even Willow that he could bring his visual imagination to the screen. But it wasn't ILM that held the clues for what would become the Phantom Menace's story and tone. For that, one needed to look a little further afield: Chicago and Indiana. Radioland Murders was a George Lucas joint, released just 4 years before The Phantom Menace. It seems about as far away from Star Wars as possible, a gag-laden period piece about a Chicago radio station embroiled in a madcap murder comedy. But it shares a producer, a cinematographer, and a production designer. And it's a story by George Lucas himself, alongside longtime collaborators who worked on the screenplays of American Graffiti and The Temple of Doom. Upon release, Radioland Murders reviews were savage, criticized for being scattershot and unfunny. Nonetheless, I'd recommend giving it a look. In an era where many films come from the same factory floor, it's a totally unique artifact, entirely out of step with the 1990s, imperfectly perfect, fun and weird. It's also got a crazy great cast. Christopher Lloyd, Michael McKean, Mary Stuart Masterson, Brian Benben, if you know, you know, Ned Beatty, even Dylan Baker in a small role. Plus, there are more tea leaves to read here than in the overlapping creative teams, and an early use of digital set extensions. Radioland Murders is Exhibit A of just how stubbornly George Lucas commits to his particular obsessions. In 1994, the year Pulp Fiction was released, when comedies like Beavis and Butthead and Ace Ventura were popular, George Lucas released a 1930s-style screwball comedy about radio. His inspirations are all in the past: cinema, radio, and television history. Between Return of the Jedi and The Phantom Menace, for example, seminal, big-budget action films were out there to steal from or be inspired by. Aliens, RoboCop, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the Terminator films, The Matrix, chock full of cyberpunk and anime, was released the same year as The Phantom Menace. Over in Lucasland, he essentially ignored all that material. He referenced Ben-Hur and the Hidden Fortress. Radioland Murders showed how allergic Lucas was to putting his finger on the pulse. But it was the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, now on Disney Plus as the re-edited The Adventures of Young Indiana Jones, that clearly foreshadowed Star Wars Episode I, The Phantom Menace. Not only because the team behind the scenes is largely the same, but because Young Indy is the prequel series that Lucas made before the prequels. It shows how Lucas approached exactly the same kind of mission. For example, Lucas, in Young Indy, casts his famed protagonist as a kid, which he did immediately afterwards with Anakin Skywalker in The Phantom Menace, and he later recast the roles with dashing young men. It would have been conventional, and probably easier, to start Episode I as the story of Anakin and Obi-Wan, a Jedi Knight and his hotshot trainee, one in his 30s and the other in his 20s, just as it would have been an obvious choice to make the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles a series of Sean Patrick Flannery vehicles and skipped Indiana Jones as a preteen. Casting children in both roles was a creatively challenging choice that George Lucas made twice. Moreover, the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles largely eschews the popcorn-friendly Spielberg style. The show is not a romp. There are exceptions. Treasure of the Peacock's Eye imitated the films a bit. There's a showdown with Vlad the Impaler that's got some silly magic. But most of the show is basically educational. Lucas even produced 100 documentaries that were meant to be released alongside the Young Indy episodes as a resource for teaching history to high school students. In the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, Indiana Jones is not really an action hero. He's more often a tourist or a spy. He sees the world. He talks to friends, soldiers, captains, contacts, love interests. He does a lot of lying about who he is and sneaking into and out of places. He's passing along messages. He's bearing witness to history, not leaping off of trains or hanging off the bottom of racing trucks. History is, after all, a series of treaties and negotiations, meetings and messages. Fistfights and car chases don't play into it all that often. If you want to make a story about history, you'll have to shoehorn in the daring do. Christopher Lee, for example, appears in the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. Is he a menacing swordsman a la Count Dooku? No, he's trying unsuccessfully to get a treaty signed for Karl I of Austria. This is exactly what we get in Star Wars. The Jedi of Episode I are emissaries, negotiators, sneaking into and out of palaces, attending council meetings, and bringing a wayward political leader to the capital. Is there action in Episode I? Yes, spectacular action. But the action is fit into the periphery of a trade dispute that even the characters call trivial. I think it's screenwriting 101 to never call your own plot points trivial. You want the audience to invest in the stakes of your story. But trivial in history doesn't mean what it does in a standard screenplay. Trivial just means the characters can't see how important the events they are a part of will be in hindsight. That's how history works. Episode 1 essentially treats Star Wars history the way Young Indiana Jones Chronicles treats actual history. Finally, there's another minor motif that's carried over from Chronicles to The Phantom Menace, establishing shots. The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles were shot on location all over the world. Because of this, you'll notice lots of shots of where exactly they were. Why go on location if you're not going to show off Venice? This habit transferred over to the prequels, where establishing shots of Naboo, of Coruscant, feel like the camera crew wanted to show the audience how beautiful these places would be to visit. Never mind they were entirely made up in the computer. These establishing shots have the cadence and appearance of a crew shooting on location, a hallmark of Young Indiana Jones. Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace, more than any other Star Wars film, felt like a shock to fandom, a jarring departure from Return of the Jedi, with beloved characters enmeshed in deep relationships confronting the highest stakes with hugs, smiles, and charm. But if we had been paying attention to Lucasfilm's preceding productions, we would have seen the groundwork laid for exactly the type of film we got. A history, stubborn, idiosyncratic, and peculiar. We would, at least, have been less surprised to read, turmoil has engulfed the Galactic Republic. The taxation of trade routes to outlying star systems is in dispute.
That's what Star Wars means to us this week. Thanks to Matthew Freeman for his piece on The Phantom Menace. That was fantastic.
Absolutely.
Next week, he was a writer on SNL. He was a writer on Seinfeld. He worked on Curb Your Enthusiasm. He was the showrunner for Veep. Who could we possibly be talking to? It's David Mandel and his...
The David Mandel, folks.
The David Mandel. And he's got a Star Wars collection that will blow your mind.
So cool. I spent an hour just feeling so jealous.
It's painful. It really is. I'm like, I got a Luke Skywalker action figure.
I know. I'm like, I have fan art that's like a mix of genres and characters. I don't have nearly anything quite as cool as David Mandel does. But it was a really fun conversation, and you should tune in.
Yes, it's absolutely a fun time, and he's a great guest. So until next week, may the Force be with you.
And with you.
I knew I'd have fun. I knew it was a good subject.
Mm-hmm.
It was a meaty subject. It had like a lot of...
Oh, I mean, this could be a
stuff
dissertation.
Yeah, it could be.
Like,
yeah.
I mean, I'm sure, honestly, somewhere out there is a theater kid listening to this going, hey, don't steal my idea, man. I'm working on that right now.
There's some podcaster going, looking at his logo, masks and Star Wars, just going, you just did in 20 minutes what I've been working 3 years on. Son of a bitch!
If it's not already written, there's someone out there being like, excuse me, don't steal my sparkle.
Yes.
There you go, there's your secret scene.
Hi, this is Dave. And before we get to the show, I wanted to ask you a favor. One of our goals this year is to grow the show so that What Does Star Wars Mean to You reaches more listeners. And that's where we're asking you for help. And it's really easy. Wherever you listen to us, please hit that subscribe button. If you're liking the show, give us a 5-star rating and review on the platform you listen to us. We make a lot of fun of the algorithm and the smash that button thing, but it really does help us get noticed by new fans. And if you want to join in on the conversation, find us on social at Star Wars Mean to You. That's Star Wars Mean, the number 2 in the letter U. Now, let's chat some Star Wars.